discussions, I want to start ahead. Now I will introduce Nicholas. So he's gonna talk about really a hot topic that's for everyone. Uh, how to prepare your resume and how to interview. So he's gonna give us hints and tips in there. So he is a director of data science at Cape Fear Collective, a nonprofit which supports southeastern Caroline's frontline organization in combating poverty, racism, poor health, education outcomes, and socioeconomic disparities. I think it's a fantastic job. And prior to CFC, he's a great and extended knowledge of data science and consulting skills in the marketing analytics space and transforming the way Fortune 500 companies, including Southwest Airlines, P&G, and many other companies, and transforming the way for Fortune 500 companies think about their customer strategy and value propositions. So he's currently in North Carolina, as we discussed in Raleigh. So we are excited to hear from him. And Nick, it's your turn.
Thank you for the introduction. Making sure you can still hear me. Everybody hear me?
Yeah, it's good.
Right, cool. Yeah. So as Murat said, I have been in data science, in the data science industry for a while now. I've been in consulting. I did some work at Lowe's, and in each of those organizations, I led and hired data science teams. So when Magnimind reached out and asked if I would speak about hiring and resume interview tips, it seemed like a good fit because I've done tons of interviews. I've looked at lots of resumes. I've hired teams and managed teams. So I think the format here is I've jotted down a couple of my main tips that I usually tell people. I know you were kind of half joking earlier when you said, Murat, that these are tricks, but I think they're more behaviors that we should do. I think kind of having the mindset of, and I know it's not what you're suggesting, but kind of having the mindset of kind of gaming the system to get a job it usually leads to someone not being happy with the job they have. So I think I was going to share these and then open it up to questions via chat or questions throughout, and I can kind of talk about my experiences and the things that I've seen in the data science industry that employers are looking for. So the first tip is projects. I know a lot of people talk about this, but it's important that you start having projects. And I think a lot of people say, when do I have the time to do this? If you're in a boot camp or you're in a school program or even a job that you're in and you have some passion for some data set, even if it's, I'm going to go download this Premier League soccer data set or this data set about wine or food or music or whatever, just pull in a data set and start doing stuff to it. Start analyzing it, creating graphs, finding insights, finding correlations, and put this stuff on your GitHub or wherever, so that me as an employer, when I look at your LinkedIn, I look at your application, I can go to your GitHub site, I can see projects that you're working on, even if it's homework assignments for a course, I can start to get an idea for how you code, how you approach a problem, how you try to solve a problem, how you visualize data, how you communicate the results of an analysis. When I go to somebody's resume and they have a link to a GitHub and I can go and immediately see their projects, that's a huge benefit to them, because that saves me a lot of time to say, okay, this is somebody who's actually in the data space. They're actually doing projects. They're actually thinking about, data-driven analyses, etc. It gives you a huge leg up versus somebody else in the kind of initial screening process as we're looking at resumes. Now, add a caveat to that make sure that if you are going to link your projects on a resume, you're going to link to your GitHub, you actually have stuff there. Because I've had other people who apply for a position and they put a link to their GitHub, and I go and look at it, and it's literally just one line of hello world type code in Python in one repo. Like, don't make me go to your GitHub to see that that's all that you have there. So I'd say you get yourself 2 to 3 solid projects, put them on GitHub, and then put a link to your GitHub on LinkedIn, on your resume. All that kind of stuff is really the first big tip behavior that I have. Yeah, I think that's a good point. So I've heard people say that too. Like I'm a consultant, and all my projects are for clients, so they're sensitive. I think that's where it's just when you're ready to make that shift, you just got to kind of have a couple of those little side projects that you worked on. Now I've done things too where, and you have to be careful here that you're not sharing proprietary methods or whatever, but say your company you're working for, I did pricing and marketing analytics at Lowe's. So as long as I'm not revealing kind of proprietary methods at Lowe's, I could have a side project where I download some retail data from some publicly available, made up source, and do some basic market basket analysis, something that wouldn't be some proprietary algorithm or some industry trade secret that Lowe's would get upset with me about. And then I could have that as being, I'm kind of doing the same thing. I'm showcasing some of my skills, but not in a client sensitive way. Kaggle can be a good way to display your data science skills. I think some companies, some higher employers hold more, put more weight on the I finished, 87th in some Kaggle competition than others do. But I think at the very least, having some Kaggle competition can be a good way to show your projects. Yeah, I think removing sensitive snippets would be a good way to get around the question around client sensitivity or customer sensitivity, employer sensitivity. You could have like a body of code and just an explanation of proprietary algorithm here's the output or something like that. I think the question would be probably for your employer's legal team on whether or not that's actually legit, but I could see that being a possible way around it. For sure, projects during master courses could count. I've seen that before when I'm hiring people out of an academic program and they say this was a homework assignment for my survival analysis class. And here's what the question was, and here's how I approached it. Here's my code to solve it. What's nice when you do that though, because imagine if I'm interviewing folks out of your master's program and I'm interviewing all of your 100 or so classmates, I'm going to see that same project over and over and over again. What's interesting to me is to see, here's the assignment, here's what I did, and then here's where I took it to a different place. Like, here's what I did that was a little bit different. Here's how I kind of add some application, or I pulled down this different data set and looked at this a little bit differently. I always like to see that. There's a comment here about randomly generating replacement values, and I think that's a good approach too. All right, so next, in the interview process, remember that it's a two-way street. Ask questions that you think help you determine whether or not that's a good place for you to work. And I always get people always ask me, like, well, what kind of questions should I be asking? It's like, well, what kind of work do you want to do? Well, I really want to do machine learning model building. Okay, well, ask if there's opportunity am I going to be using machine learning techniques? Am I going to be building ML models that are actually going to be used? That's a really interesting and important question to ask when you're interviewing for a data science team. I like to ask, there's a couple different ways to ask it, but one way to ask it is, tell me about a model that your team built that is currently in production and use by the organization. Because if they can't answer that question, then probably anything that you build is going to end up on a shelf somewhere too, right? So ask them, how is the organization using insights that your team is creating, curating, visualizing, communicating, right? Because that starts to break down whether or not this company is actually data-driven and is actually going to have an opportunity for your work to be seen and utilized. Another thing that I like to ask, or I think that people should ask when they're, especially when they're looking for their first analytics job, but really at any point in the process, is tell me about the experience levels of the rest of the team. Like, what's the skill set? What's the experience? Can I talk to some of the other team? Because especially if this is your first, the hardest gig to get as a data scientist is the first one. Because once you get the first one, then you have time, and then you kind of have that experience to help you leverage into other positions. So if you're looking for that first job, it's really important that you have someone that you can learn from. So if you're a first-time data scientist and you're moving into a position where you're going to be the only data scientist, that's probably not a good role for you. No one's going to be there to challenge you. No one's going to be there to correct your mistakes or for you to learn from, to ask questions. That's just not a really good role for a beginner. I would look for a role that has a larger data science team, has a couple people that have been there for a while at that organization, a couple years, so that they can kind of help you. But then also look for people who've been other places, because I think there's benefit to working with a senior mentor who's been in a couple different other companies too, so they can kind of share that experience. Okay, I have a couple questions here. Someone who's looking for a senior level DS position. I think this is a good question. So there's kind of this diverging paths, and a lot of companies are realizing that this is something that they need to approach. There's kind of, you have to go into management, or you have to kind of go into a lot of companies are providing an alternative path where you don't have to go into team management, and you can kind of work your way up as a more technical role. I think the first tip I can say is figure out which of those tracks you want. There's pros and cons to both. Some people just want to keep doing the cool data science, machine learning stuff, but doing it at more advanced levels or having increased roles and responsibilities. Some people want to have that leadership and that kind of management role. And I think the downside to that is you get further and further away from doing the stuff that brought you into data science in the first place a lot of the time, right? Once you get into management, you're doing less of the model building. You're just kind of overarching strategy and stuff like that as other folks are doing that. Main difference between data science and machine learning, I think, everybody has their kind of different definitions of what these things are, but the way I think about them is data science is more of a kind of general Swiss Army knife within an organization, whereas a machine learning engineer is your screwdriver, or it's a very specific tool set, generally speaking, than a data scientist is expected to kind of be. You wouldn't use the screwdriver on your Swiss Army knife to fix a car, right? You'd want an actual screwdriver. So a data scientist is like a general multi-purpose tool. What is the expression? Jack of all trades, master of none, or whatever. I don't know. Maybe that's a good example. Maybe it's not. Sorry, I might have to skip some of these and come back. Entry level roles that go beyond crunching financial data. Yeah, I think that's where that question comes into play, where I said, what are some models that you're building? Walk me through some models that you're building that are actually in production. And is that what I'm going to be doing? Like, kind of be honest. Like, this is a chance for you to really put them to the task and ask them their questions, the questions that will help you understand what that role is. I'm gonna skip some of these and come back. So I'm gonna go on to some of the other tips. I think they might answer some of these, and I'll come back and do some questions at the end. The next, because I think a couple of people said, how do I reach out? The next tip number 3 is relationships. Make relationships. Act like a person. Don't act like a robot. LinkedIn's a great way to do this. I can't tell you how many times I will get a LinkedIn message or just a random email from someone who just says, "Are you hiring?" or "Have you reviewed my resume yet?" or something like that. And it's like, you wouldn't just walk up to a person on the street and ask them that. If you want to actually create a meaningful, memorable relationship and impression, then, put some thought into how you create that communication. So some examples are, I've had people, for example, after an event like this, now I'm going to get 127 emails. But after an event like this, some people will take that opportunity to email me and say, "Hey, you said something really interesting in this talk. This is what it was. I have a follow-up question on that, or do you have any advice on how to do that?" That's an opportunity for you to kind of create a relationship with somebody, or create a kind of interaction that kind of creates that relationship, right? If you just kind of apply for a job and then reach out to the hiring manager and say, "Hey, did you review my resume yet?" I can guarantee that's going to go in the trash. Another example is, sometimes people will say, so at my job, I do a lot of work with, housing, food security, economic disparity. If somebody reached out to me and said, "Hey, I built this dashboard that's on food security, and I know that you're interested in food security. Can you take a look at this dashboard and give me some advice?" I can guarantee that I will 100% reply to that email, even if it's just, "Hey, this looks great. Here's a couple of pieces of insight. Here's a couple organizations where you can get different data." But that's creating an actual working relationship. And when you apply for that job down the road at my organization, and I look back at that chat history and I see that message, or I'm kind of like, make that connection. "Oh, this is the person who did that project." I've got a much better experience and interaction than the person who just said, "Hey, will you please hire me?" So relationships is number 3. Number 4 is a big one, and I want everyone to kind of take this to heart, because I think it's really important, and it's honesty. Be honest about your skills. So if a role wants you to, if I say, "Hey, what's your experience with, deploying models in Kubernetes containers, whatever," and you say, "Oh yeah, I've done that 100 times." You're not fooling anybody, because if you get hired and then you're asked to do that and you don't know how to do it, then you're going to feel really silly, and you're going to make a lot of people upset. And it's not going to serve you well, because now you're in a position that you can't be successful, and the organization is not going to be successful. So an alternative to that, without kind of selling yourself short, is, "I haven't done that, but that's something actually I'm really interested in. And if that's a requirement for this job, I'm a fast learner. I can do that." Blah, whatever. I've actually had people give that answer, an answer to something like that, and then actually follow up with me 2 days later and say, "Hey, look, I just took this course on deploying models in containers, and here's what I got, and here's some things that I learned. I just want to let you know that thanks for the advice on doing that. That's a tool I've added into my belt." I might still not hire that person, but at least they've been honest with me, and I've kind of we've kind of gone back and forth. So be honest about your skills. Don't say you have 5 years of consulting experience if you don't, or whatever. I think it's just really important. And I think another thing that's important is, for the international students, being upfront about the sponsorship process as early as is appropriate in the conversation, because I've gotten several rounds through with a candidate before that I really liked, and they're like, "Oh, hey, by the way, I need H-1B," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, I wish you said this earlier, because I would have saved us both some time." So I think honesty in the process is crucial and ultimately will benefit you. I'm going to answer some of the questions. I didn't study data science, but would like to develop into one. What's the best approach? Well, depends on your, lots of people go into data science with, lost my audio here. Sorry, can you all hear me? Did I lose audio? Okay, cool. Depending on what skill set you're going into a new data science career with, I think will determine the answer to this. So if you already have the statistics, the computer science, the mathematics background, then I think you're already well equipped. I think at that point, just doing some projects and stuff might help you kind of create that portfolio that gets you that first data science gig. If you don't have those, I think that's where a boot camp or a master's program, or even just some online courses can help you. There's pros and cons to all of those approaches. I'm sure Murat knows a lot of those, and Magnimind sounds like has a really strong program. So I think if you don't have that computer science background, or at least that kind of programming background, that's where a boot camp can really help you kind of accelerate that piece of the learning, because it's such a crucial part. Any data science, I mean, there's an expectation that you know R or Python or probably one of those two. AWS machine learning certification. I think it's great. I think a lot of stuff's happening in AWS these days. Any of those certificates, I think, are great, but at the same time, I will take somebody with solid projects on their GitHub that I can actually see how they're thinking over somebody with 10 or 13 certificates any day of the week. Like that's more what I'm looking for, is people who are actually doing end-to-end analytics type projects on their GitHub. How should we get at interviews other than LinkedIn? I think that relationship piece is huge there. So this is an interesting one. So to become a data science manager, should you have greater experience than data science technicians? And I think it just depends on the company. Most of the orgs that I've worked in, it's again kind of divergent paths. And once you get to a certain level of data science, say a data science 2 or whatever, now there's 2 paths you can take. You can kind of, everyone's expected to have that requisite knowledge before they go into either management, director, whatever, senior director, whatever the next role is, or kind of senior data scientist, technical lead, whatever that kind of path is. So I think, it's generally, you don't have to have like senior, PhD level computer science chops to be a manager of analytics or data science, but there does need to be some requisite knowledge, maybe a data scientist 2 or something like that. But then really it's about strategy. It's about managing people. It's about, can you help them turn that overarching project into different data science tasks? Can you help them manage the performance of those models and kind of push them and ask the right questions? Like, did you test for this? Did you test for that? Did you test for this? I'm not actually going to go in and do that, but I know how to ask those questions. I am, because I'm in a different type of role, but typically the manager is not going to be the one who's going to go in and hypertune the parameters on that model, right? But they need to be able to remind you to and tell you some ways to start. Any tips? Someone who's planning on changing from core programming to data analytics and intelligence. I think core programming, the difference between kind of core programming and analytics and data science is really just the business application. So again, I'm going to keep coming back to this: projects. Take that programming experience that you have a ton of and put it to use. Try to find some Kaggle projects or some other projects that interest you with a clear business output or a clear kind of goal at the end of that analysis, and try to apply your skills towards solving that problem. Am I seeing any trends in 2021? Obviously, Python's gotten a lot bigger and continues to get bigger. My organization is an R shop. I'm an R programmer. I've used Python. I'm a little rusty at it, but I think typically I think we put too much weight on tools personally. I think I've never met somebody who knows R that can't learn Python in a week or two. I mean, that's the reality of it. If you know R, you can learn Python. If you know Python, you can learn R. It's like Italian and Spanish to me. Like they're so similar. Now, I mean, something like programming language like, or statistical language like SAS or something's completely different. But even still, like if you know how to tell a computer what to do, I have every confidence that you can learn a new tool. So I don't put a whole lot of stock in that personally. I'm more interested in, can you solve do you know how to structure the data in a way to use this model? Can you turn this question into a series of data science tasks and sub questions? And then kind of how do you program all that? That's really more what I'm interested in than what language you're doing it in. Yeah, this is a good one. So this EDA during an interview on a data set. So I've seen a couple questions about coding tests and programming tests and interview kind of technical assessments. So the first thing that I always do, and I always like to see someone do, is break that problem into tasks. You know, you've asked me this general question, you know, what is the market saturate? How do I market to this city? Okay, well, here's the questions I need to ask. What's my current market saturation? What's my kind of cap on productivity? What is the population of this area? What's my target audience? You know, these are the sub questions that I need to ask. And then I need to ask, do I have data for all of these things? I can start exploring this one by using, you know, histograms and density plots, and you know, maybe this one's a correlation matrix, maybe this one's a line plot. Start to think about like models and visualizations that I can use to answer each of those questions. I like to see someone's mind work that way. Of course, everyone's different, but I think showing a clear process of here's how I approach every single thing. I break it into sub questions with my assumptions. I start thinking about methodology. You know, I validate those. I put it all back together. I think I asked a couple of these already. The test first, no test. I think the trend, it's tough. Some companies care about that. Some don't. I haven't really seen a trend of them going away. Companies that like to do tests still do tests, and those that don't don't. I personally don't like coding tests. I like more project-based tests where it's here's a business problem and you have a week to solve this and come back and give it to me. I don't really care if someone can memorize syntax. That's what Google's for. That's what Stack Overflow's for. But some people seem to still place a inordinate amount of weight on syntax and memorization of programming syntax, which I think is weird. Leak code, that approach actually I think is a better approach. Now, I mean, the biggest advice I can give to you though is, you know, don't take my word for it because I don't personally like those. Do some research on the organization. And if you know that organization has this kind of test, and of course, you know, study those types of questions. Generally, there's tons of information about, you know, certainly colleagues of mine that work at Facebook and Amazon and these big companies know pretty much what they're getting into. And though they can't learn the specific questions, they kind of can study for the types of questions that they're going to get. That's really helpful for them. Yeah, Marwa, I see the question about EAD card and green card. I don't know enough about that process to give you a good answer on that. So I'm not going to. I would just say maybe talk to some other people that are in that similar situation. I think what's frustrating for employers is when they genuinely want to hire. Some companies just can't. They just can't afford the sponsorship process. I'm sure you all know that it's expensive. It can be time consuming for a small organization, especially like mine that's a nonprofit. I can't do it. I don't have the time and the resources to do it. But when I was at Lowe's, we'd sponsor people all the time, H-1B, TN1, whatever. So I think it's about knowing what kind of organizations are more likely to accept or be able to offer that, and just being honest about it up front. Yeah, this is a good question. The example of a project of a beginner and its different parts that would appeal to you as a hiring manager. So if I'm, no one's sitting next to me, Lou. I've got a multi-screen setup as most data scientists do. I've got my laptop right here, my computer, and then I've got two 32-inch screens right here, and I've got the video over here. So I'm looking right here to look at, I guess I probably don't have to look at myself there. I can look here if that makes you more comfortable, but no, good question, I guess. Could you give me an example of a project of a beginner and its different parts that would appeal to you as a hiring manager? Yeah, really just the problem solving process. So how do you take that overarching problem? So I really love to see how people lay their thoughts out, and especially the comments in their code where they say, I downloaded this data set from because I was interested in.
You had a cut in your sound actually.
My headphones just died. I'm testing to see
Okay.
that you can hear me.
It's good now.
Okay, I think you can. All right. So, you know, I downloaded this data set from this source. Here's the link. Here's the first thing that I did. Here's why I did this. Want to create a histogram to see if there are differences in distributions by group. I've got the comment there. Now I've got the code that does that. I've gotten the R markdown, the visualization. I really love seeing that thought process laid out, because there's a lot I can do with a data scientist who already has that kind of problem solving approach in place. You can't teach curiosity. You can't teach that kind of desire for investigation. I can teach you how to code. I can teach you how to test for various different statistical assumptions, et cetera, but I can't teach you how to be interested in that stuff. So I think that's what I'm looking for. Yeah, if you know Ruby, you can learn Python and R pretty quickly too. SQL. Thank you, Jasmine, for bringing up SQL. SQL is incredibly important. Now, a lot of times, as R and Python programmers or SAS programmers or whatever, we're wrapping that SQL syntax in a wrapper of some sort. But having that select from where, group by, having all that stuff is incredibly important. I recommend that people can write at least basic SQL queries. Anybody going into data science and analytics can write a basic SQL query. You should be able to do that. Now, of course, once we get into kind of nested queries and all that other stuff, that gets more complicated. You might not need that ever in your role, but you should know how to create a basic SQL query for sure. Same thing, data scraping. I think I would practice. I would definitely learn how to scrape a basic website. You know, things that like Selenium to use JavaScript websites might not be worth your time to learn until you need to know how to do one. But I think scraping a basic website is a good tool to have. I don't know much about LinkedIn assessment tests. I don't know how much value they have. Previous experience on, this is actually a good question. Lots of good questions. I like this one.
how much of your previous experience should go in there? I think all of it personally for me. Now I think kind of as you get further back, I don't need 10 to 20 bullet points on a job that you had 10 years ago, right? And as you get more recent, that's where it needs to have more detail. But another point that makes me think of is, for me personally, and again, everybody has different things they're looking for, but I don't think that the GPA belongs on your resume, especially unless you just graduated. If you graduated like 10 years ago, I don't care that you got a 3.87 in undergraduate, personally. Math professional, don't have programming background experience, don't have the confidence to send out your resume. What's my advice? My advice, just send it out. You know, I think there's always going to be this imposter syndrome. A lot of people, this is widely documented phenomenon. A lot of people talk about it, but just get out there and, you know, maybe find other people that have that similar background, and kind of talk to them too about, you know, I personally came from a math background myself. So, yeah, I think just get out there. Looking for something I haven't really answered yet. Yeah, do I have a sample project? Yeah, on my LinkedIn, you can go to my GitHub, and for example, some things, you know, I think the projects are a chance for you to show a little bit of your personality and interest too. So like if you go to my GitHub, you'll see some analysis that I did on Liverpool Football Club. I'm a big Liverpool soccer fan. Actually, they have a game that they're playing right now. And there's a whole big repo that I've done just analyzing Premier League soccer data and you know, Liverpool's performance. And that kind of is my way of showing that, you know, data is more than just a career for me. It's the way I think about the world. It's the way I kind of analyze the things that I like. I also have an app that I built where you can put in a number and determine if it's prime or not. I just said, you know, my background's in math, so I geek out about things like prime numbers. But just even simple little things like that give me a chance to show my personality to somebody who's interested in hiring me. And remember that, like, if someone's not interested in hiring you, it's not personal. You know, it's just there's tons of other jobs. Just you know, move on down the road to the next one. I think the main difference between a for-profit and nonprofit company is money. You know, you're gonna make a lot more generally at a for-profit company. Resume interview advice, I think just I'd be ready to kind of sacrifice some compensation if you're looking to go to nonprofit, but that's not what, you know, nonprofit's not for that. So I'd say generally for data scientists who are looking at getting into the nonprofit space, going way back to one of the first things that I said about, you know, having technical mentors, I would recommend going to the for-profit space first. Go work at some large, go work at Target, go work at Bank of America, learn your skill, learn your trade, you know, hone your chops, and then go to somewhere where you can kind of be, because you're going to be a little bit on an island in a smaller company or a nonprofit. There's just so many questions. I'm just trying to look for specifics. How long to stay at one company? I personally like to stay 2 or 3 years at least, because I think, you know, that gives me time to learn the skill before I go to the next organization. I will put my LinkedIn in here. I think I put it in there once already. There it is again. What are you most impressed by in an interview? And what are you mainly wanting to see from a senior role? The main thing I'm impressed by in an interview is when someone has taken the time to not only research the organization that I work for and that they're applying for, but they've also taken the time to start thinking about potential questions that I'm dealing with in my role. So let me give you an example. If I'm applying for a role at Nike, as a data scientist at Nike, and I get that interview, which number one, if you get an interview at Nike, that's huge, right? You get an interview at this big company and you got to take advantage of that opportunity. Then you need to spend some time thinking about like, okay, let me read the job description again. This is for the product design team. What are some things the product design team is probably thinking about? What kind of data do they have access to? What type of questions do you think they're asking? Maybe they're asking about length of this garment. What's the life cycle of this garment? Maybe they're thinking about price elasticity in various regions. Can I sell this t-shirt for $30 in the Southeast and $60 in San Francisco and $50 in New York or whatever, right? Maybe they're looking at that kind of thing. Maybe they're looking at, whether or not certain colors are perform better based on team associations in different regions, right? I come from Raleigh. A light blue t-shirt is not going to do very well in Raleigh because it's too close to Chapel Hill, right? Where red shirt might not do well in Durham for Duke or whatever. So, think about some of the questions, and, ideally, if you really want that Nike job, I'd put something together. I'd say, hey, I took a stab at kind of a basic, analysis plan. Are these the kind of questions that you're asking? If not, what kind of questions does your team deal with, or what kind of feedback would you have? Is this kind of what you're thinking about? Coming to an interview with something like that will put you in the top tier immediately because you're already coming with fresh ideas. And I think that's really important. I will put my GitHub here as well. What other than Python and R, which other programming software? We talked about SQL a little bit. I think, some large, if you're in a large healthcare organization or financial organization, a lot of them are using SAS. Of course, some people talked about, I think somebody mentioned Julia and Ruby. I think Java is a good skill to have, but I personally, unless I want to flex my career into more of a web dev or software dev type direction, and the role that I'm looking for requires that, I personally wouldn't spend the time on it. I'd spend my time using the tools that I have, the Python and R chops that I have, to create projects and better kind of evidence of my analytical skill. I think is a better use of time personally. Calculus, I think a lot of these masters of data science programs do this, where they kind of, I'm gonna probably get in trouble from I have a master's in data science myself, so I'm gonna maybe get in trouble here, but there's this tendency to kind of strip everything back down to linear algebra and calculus and all this stuff, and we really need to be able to understand how to derive the normal distributions CDF algebraically or whatever. You're never going to use that in your career. So, is it helpful? It just depends on where you're going. Now, for probably 85%, 90%, the vast majority of data scientists going into the industry, they're never going to need to know how to do that. Now, for people who are, on the bleeding edge and looking at kind of creating new methods and publishing and doing all this stuff, of course, they need to know how to do all of that stuff. So it's kind of just depends on what your career is. I didn't realize there was a Q&A until just now, but now I see it. We'll probably have time for one more question. Best way to get into data science in leadership roles is show examples of how you've been a leader. Are there other things that you've used your leadership skills to do? Are there chances for you to kind of mentor junior analysts at your current role so that you can kind of start developing those skills? What's your question I always ask a manager is like, what's your leadership, philosophy? How do you lead your team? And I think that's just really important. The way you kind of build those muscles is by doing it. So look for those mentorship opportunities. I probably get, I don't even know, 10 or 15 people reaching out to me a week on LinkedIn asking me for mentorship. I can only take a couple of them, but you know, all those interactions are a chance for you to kind of build those skills. And with that, I think we're at time, but I will let Murat weigh in on that.
Hello. Thank you, Nick. It's been good. There have been a lot of questions.
Can't hear you.
I like that it's more interactive. It's been more interactive. So I appreciate your time. And I guess really you gave them all major tips. And I guess there are more
Murat,
details
I can't
people
hear
may
you if
ask.
you're talking to us. I don't know if anyone else can hear. Maybe it's just me. Probably is.
Can you guys not hear? Maybe you don't
Yeah,
hear.
there you go.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, they can. So you can't hear me, Nick? No? So can you hear me, Nick?
Thank you, everybody. You've
So-
got my LinkedIn. You got my LinkedIn in there. So reach out. Let me add my GitHub real quick. Someone asked about that.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. I guess Nick can hear me.
Yeah, you can buy me a beer.
Okay, sorry.
Here is my GitHub. There it is. Cool. All right, everybody have a good rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank
Murat, for having
you.
me.
Appreciate it. So
Bye.
everyone have a good rest of the day. Take care.